The cameras were rolling live when Steve Harvey suddenly stopped mid-sentence, his famous quick wit completely abandoned as he stared at Jonathan Roumie in stunned silence. What the actor, who portrays Jesus, had just revealed about his faith was so unexpectedly powerful that it rendered the seasoned host speechless, transforming a routine game show moment into something that would soon have viewers across America reaching for their phones to call loved ones about what they had just witnessed. Steve, we're still rolling," whispered the show's producer from behind the cameras. But Harvey remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Jonathan with an expression of wonder. The studio audience, initially confused by the unexpected pause, began to sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jonathan stood quietly beside his teammates, a gentle smile on his face, seemingly unaware of the profound impact his words had just created. The moment had begun earlier that morning when Jonathan Roumie arrived at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. He was part of a special celebrity edition featuring cast members from The Chosen playing against a team of Christian musicians. As Jonathan walked through the backstage area, crew members whispered excitedly about having the actor who portrayed Jesus on their set, many requesting selfies and autographs. Steve Harvey, preparing in his dressing room, had been briefing himself on the guests. He knew Jonathan as the talented actor from The Chosen, but he hadn't expected the personal connection he was about to experience. Steve's assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Harvey, the cast is here for rehearsal." Steve adjusted his signature suit and walked toward the stage, mentally preparing his usual comedic banter. During the pre-show meet and greet, Steve approached Jonathan with his characteristic warm handshake. "Man, I've heard incredible things about your show," Steve said genuinely. "The way you portray Jesus has touched so many people." Jonathan's humble response immediately caught Steve's attention. "I'm just a vessel, Steve. The real work is being done by someone much greater than me," Jonathan replied softly. Something in Jonathan's tone made Steve pause. As a man of faith himself, Steve recognized authenticity when he heard it. "You know, playing that role must come with incredible responsibility," Steve observed. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "Every day I pray that I'm worthy of representing him. It's changed my life completely." Their conversation was interrupted by the stage manager calling for places, but Steve felt drawn to continue talking with this remarkable actor. The cameras began rolling for the celebrity edition, and Steve introduced both teams with his usual enthusiasm. "Today, we've got the cast of The Chosen taking on some of Nashville's finest Christian musicians," he announced with thunderous applause. Jonathan waved to the audience with characteristic humility, his presence somehow calming the usual frenetic energy of the game show's set. Even the lighting seemed softer somehow. The first few rounds proceeded normally, with both teams laughing and playing the game with good-natured competition. Steve cracked his typical jokes, and the audience responded with familiar laughter. But those watching closely noticed something different about Jonathan's demeanor, a peaceful presence that seemed to affect everyone around him, including the usually high-energy host, who found himself speaking more gently than usual. During a commercial break, Steve approached Jonathan again. "I have to ask you something," Steve said quietly. "How do you handle the pressure of playing Jesus? I mean, that's got to be overwhelming." Jonathan's eyes lit up with genuine joy. "Steve, the beautiful thing is that I don't carry the pressure alone. When I step into that role, I feel his presence with me." The conversation continued as makeup artists touched up their faces for the next segment. "You know what's interesting?" Jonathan shared. "Before The Chosen, I was struggling as an actor, just trying to make it in Hollywood. I was living in a tiny apartment, working odd jobs, questioning whether I was following the right path. I almost gave up on acting completely." Steve listened intently, sensing there was more to this story. "I remember being at rock bottom," Jonathan continued, his voice growing softer. "I was praying one night, asking God what He wanted from my life. The next week, I got the call about auditioning for Jesus in The Chosen. It wasn't just a role, it was an answer to prayer." Steve nodded, understanding the power of divine timing. As someone who had his own struggles before finding success, he could relate to Jonathan's journey. The stage manager called for places again, and they returned to their positions. As the game resumed, Steve found himself looking at Jonathan differently. This wasn't just an actor playing a character. This was a man whose life had been genuinely transformed by his faith. The audience seemed to sense it, too. their applause becoming more reverent whenever Jonathan spoke or answered a survey question. Halfway through the show, during another family member's turn, Steve decided to ask Jonathan a more personal question. "Jonathan, I have to ask this because our audience would love to know. What's the most challenging part about playing Jesus?" The question hung in the air as Jonathan considered his response carefully, his teammates and the opposing team listening with genuine curiosity and respect. Jonathan took a deep breath, his hand moving unconsciously to touch the small cross necklace he always wore. "Steve, the most challenging part isn't learning lines or dealing with the pressure of expectations," he began, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that made the entire studio fall silent. "The most challenging part is trying to live up to his example every single day, even when the cameras aren't rolling." The studio audience was completely quiet now, hanging on every word. Steve leaned against his podium, giving Jonathan his full attention. "When I put on those robes and step onto that set," Jonathan continued, "I'm constantly reminded that Jesus wasn't just a character in a story. He was real. He lived, he loved, he suffered for us. How do you portray infinite love and compassion? How do you show the face of God?" Steve's usual comedic timing was nowhere to be found as he processed Jonathan's words. "Man, that's deep," Steve said quietly, his voice lacking its usual boisterous energy. The cameras continued rolling, but everyone on set seemed to forget. They were filming a game show. This had become something else entirely, a moment of genuine spiritual connection broadcast to millions of homes across America. "But here's what I've learned," Jonathan said, stepping closer to Steve with a gentle intensity. "Jesus doesn't ask us to be perfect. He asks us to be willing. Every morning when I wake up, I pray that same prayer. Lord, make me willing to be your vessel today." His words carried such conviction that even the hardened crew members found themselves moved by his authenticity. Steve's mind drifted to his own morning prayers, his own struggles with faith and doubt. As a public figure, he understood the challenge of living up to expectations, but he'd never considered the unique burden of portraying the Son of God. "You know what strikes me?" Steve said thoughtfully. "A lot of actors would see that role as just another job, but for you, it's clearly become something much more personal." "Steve, that's exactly right," Jonathan replied, his eyes brightening. "Initially, I auditioned because I needed work. I was broke, desperate, and honestly just hoping for any role that would pay the bills. But the moment I started studying Jesus' life, really studying it, not just reading scripts, everything changed." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Steve found himself nodding along, completely absorbed in the conversation. The show's director, watching from the control room, whispered to his assistant, "Should we cut to commercial?" But something told him to keep rolling. This wasn't typical Family Feud content, but it was clearly resonating with everyone present. The energy in the studio had shifted from entertainment to something approaching reverence, and both teams were listening with rapt attention to Jonathan's testimony. "If you believe God can use ordinary moments for extraordinary purposes, comment the words, 'I believe,' below." "I started reading the Gospels differently," Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "Not as scripts to memorize, but as accounts of a real person who changed the world through love. I began to understand that Jesus wasn't some distant, untouchable figure. He was fully human. He experienced joy, sorrow, frustration, and temptation just like we do. But he chose love every single time." Steve felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same feeling he experienced during powerful sermons at his own church. "You know what, Jonathan? I've been hosting television shows for decades, and I've interviewed countless celebrities and public figures, but I've never heard anyone talk about their work with such genuine faith and humility." The audience murmured in agreement, many wiping away unexpected tears. "That's because this isn't really work for me anymore," Jonathan said with a soft laugh. "Every day on that set is like a retreat, when I'm surrounded by the other actors who play the disciples. When we're filming scenes of Jesus teaching or healing or simply showing compassion, I feel like I'm in the presence of something holy. It's transformed not just my career, but my entire life." Steve's famous quick wit had completely abandoned him as he listened to Jonathan speak. He found himself thinking about his own relationship with God, his own prayers for guidance and wisdom. "Man, you're making me want to be a better Christian just listening to you," Steve admitted honestly. The admission surprised even him. He rarely shared such personal thoughts on camera, but something about Jonathan's authenticity made vulnerability feel safe. "Steve, that's the beauty of Jesus' message," Jonathan replied, his face glowing with genuine joy. "He doesn't call us to be perfect, he calls us to love." When I'm on that set playing scenes where Jesus is teaching his disciples, I realize that we're all still his disciples. Every one of us in this studio, everyone watching at home, we're all invited into that same relationship of love and grace. The studio had become so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed loud. Steve looked out at the audience and saw faces that had been transformed from typical game show excitement to something approaching wonder. Many were crying openly, and he could see crew members wiping their eyes behind the cameras. This was no longer about Family Feud. This had become an unexpected moment of ministry. "You know what's amazing?" Steve said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it on television. "I invite celebrities on this show all the time, and usually, we're talking about their latest projects, their success stories, their glamorous lives. But you're standing here talking about being a vessel for God's love. And honestly, man, it's the most powerful thing I've heard in years." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. Jonathan smiled humbly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention being focused on him. "Steve, that's not me you're responding to. That's the Holy Spirit working through this conversation. When we make ourselves available to God, He uses even ordinary moments like a game show to touch hearts and remind people of His love." His words carried such gentle authority that even the most skeptical crew members found themselves nodding in agreement. The show's producer had long since abandoned any thought of returning to the game. The phones in the control room were lighting up with calls from viewers who were being moved by what they were witnessing. This unscripted moment of faith was reaching people in ways that scripted entertainment never could. He made the decision to let the moment continue, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Jonathan, I have to ask you something," Steve said, his voice carrying a vulnerability that millions of viewers had never heard before. "When you're playing Jesus, do you ever feel, I don't know how to put this, do you ever feel like you're actually in His presence?" The question came from the deepest part of Steve's heart, and everyone could sense the genuine spiritual hunger behind it. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as he considered his response. "Steve, I don't want to sound crazy, but yes, there are moments on that set when I'm delivering one of Jesus' teachings or showing compassion to someone playing a hurting character, and I feel like I'm not alone. It's like Jesus is right there, with me, guiding my words and actions. It's the most humbling and beautiful experience of my life." The silence that followed was profound. Steve stood motionless, processing Jonathan's words, completely unaware that he was still on live television. His mind raced through his own experiences of faith. Moments in church when he felt God's presence, times of prayer when he sensed divine guidance, instances when he knew he was being used for something greater than himself. He recognized the truth in Jonathan's testimony because he had experienced similar moments. "Man," Steve finally whispered, his voice barely audible, but picked up clearly by his microphone. That's beautiful." He looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time, suddenly aware of the sacred nature of what was happening. This game show set had been transformed into a sanctuary, and Jonathan Roumie had been the unlikely minister who made it possible through his simple, honest testimony about faith. The audience sat in reverent silence, many openly weeping as they witnessed this authentic moment of spiritual connection between two men of faith. Some had come expecting laughs and prizes. Instead, they were receiving something infinitely more valuable, a genuine encounter with the reality of God's love and presence. The energy in the room was unlike anything anyone had experienced on a television set before. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Steve continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing in this unexpected spiritual conversation. "I pray every morning before I come to work. I asked God to use me to help me bring joy and laughter to people who might be struggling. But I never expected Him to use a Family Feud taping to minister to my own heart." His honesty was raw and beautiful. Jonathan stepped closer to Steve, his presence radiating the same peace that viewers of The Chosen recognized in his portrayal of Jesus. "Steve, that's exactly how God works. He uses ordinary moments, ordinary people, ordinary conversations to reveal His extraordinary love. This moment right here, it's not an accident. God knew that everyone watching needed to hear about His love and presence. His words carried the authority of deep conviction and experience. Steve found himself nodding, understanding flooding his face. You're right, think about it. Jesus used fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary people to change the world. And here we are, a game show host and an actor having a conversation about faith that's touching hearts across America. He gestured to the audience, many of whom were still visibly moved by what they were witnessing. The Holy Spirit was clearly at work in this moment. That's the beauty of Jesus' message, Jonathan replied, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that viewers loved in The Chosen. He doesn't need our perfection, he just needs our willingness. When we make ourselves available to him, he can use any situation to reveal his love and truth. As he spoke, it was as if the character of Jesus and the actor Jonathan had merged into one authentic voice of faith and hope. The cameras continued rolling, but everyone had forgotten about television protocols and commercial breaks. This had transcended entertainment and become something approaching a worship service. The lighting technician, a self-proclaimed atheist, found himself wiping away tears he couldn't explain. The makeup artist, who rarely attended church, was silently praying for the first time in years. God was moving in unexpected ways through this unlikely venue. You know what's beautiful about what you're saying? Steve observed, his emotional walls completely down now. It's not theoretical or preachy. You're talking about a real relationship with a real God who shows up in real situations. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I've been a Christian for years, but sometimes I forget that Jesus isn't just a historical figure. He's alive and present right now, even here on this game show set. Exactly, Steve, Jonathan replied with growing excitement. Jesus promised he would be with us always, and he meant it. When 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he's there. Well, we've got a lot more than 3 people here today, and his name has definitely been honored in our conversation. He gestured to the audience and crew, all of whom were clearly being touched by the presence of God in this unexpected moment. Steve looked around the studio with new eyes, seeing past the cameras and lights to the hearts that were being stirred. You know what? I think we need to pray right now. The words came out before he could stop them, surprising even himself. If that's okay with everyone, I feel like God is in this place and we should acknowledge him. The audience erupted in agreement, many already bowing their heads in anticipation. Jonathan's face lit up with joy at Steve's suggestion. I would be honored to pray with you, Steve, and with everyone here. He looked around the studio, including the camera crew and production staff. God doesn't distinguish between those in front of the cameras and those behind them. We're all his children, and he loves each one of us infinitely. The sincerity and inclusion in his voice brought fresh tears to many eyes. The show's director, watching from the control room, made an unprecedented decision. Instead of cutting away or going to commercial, he instructed his team to keep all cameras rolling. He sensed that they were documenting something historic, a moment when entertainment television had become a vehicle for genuine spiritual encounter. Millions of viewers were about to witness something they would never forget. Steve removed his glasses and wiped his eyes, his composure completely gone, but his spirit soaring. Jonathan, would you lead us in prayer? I feel like God spoke through you today, in a way that touched every heart in this place. His request was humble and genuine, showing a side of the famous host that few had ever seen. The vulnerability he displayed was both touching and inspiring. I would be honored, Jonathan replied softly, extending his hands toward Steve in invitation. Without hesitation, Steve took his hands, and soon other cast members and even crew members were joining them in a spontaneous circle of prayer on the Family Feud set. The audience watched in amazement as television history was being made, not through entertainment, but through authentic spiritual encounter. As they joined hands, Jonathan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Heavenly Father, he began, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that millions recognized from The Chosen. Thank you for this unexpected moment of grace. Thank you for using ordinary conversations and ordinary people to reveal your extraordinary love. His prayer was simple, but profound, speaking directly to hearts that were hungry for authentic spiritual connection. Thank you for Steve's heart to seek you and honor you even in his work. Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Thank you for every person in this studio and everyone watching at home. Remind us all that you are not distant or untouchable, but present with us in every moment, ready to love us, guide us, and use us for your glory. The prayer was transforming the entire atmosphere. Steve squeezed Jonathan's hands tighter, feeling the presence of God in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Lord, he added, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for sending Jonathan here today. Thank you for using him to remind us that you're real, you're present, and you love us more than we can imagine. Help us to live like we believe it. His addition to the prayer was heartfelt and authentic. And Father Jonathan concluded, we pray for everyone who will see this moment. Touch their hearts the way you've touched ours today. Remind them that they are loved, valued, and never alone. Help us all to be vessels of your love in a world that desperately needs to know you. As he finished, a profound silence settled over the studio as if heaven itself was acknowledging this sacred moment. When they opened their eyes, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. The audience was openly weeping, crew members were wiping their faces, and even the hardened production staff were visibly moved. What had started as a routine celebrity family feud taping had become an unexpected encounter with the divine. The presence of God was so tangible that everyone could feel it. Steve looked at Jonathan with wonder and gratitude. Man, I don't even know what to say. This wasn't supposed to happen today. We were supposed to play a game, have some laughs, and give away some prizes. Instead, you've reminded us all why we're really here. To love God and love each other. His words came from the depths of his heart. Steve, that's the beautiful thing about God, Jonathan replied with a radiant smile. He specializes in turning ordinary moments into extraordinary encounters. When we make ourselves available to him, he can use any situation to reveal his love and truth. The joy on his face was infectious, and everyone in the studio could feel the truth of his words resonating in their hearts. The show's producer, who had been watching from the control room, walked onto the set with tears in his eyes. I've been in television for 30 years, he announced to everyone present, and I've never witnessed anything like this. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned, but this was exactly what needed to happen. His acknowledgement of the divine nature of the moment brought fresh waves of emotion. Steve nodded in agreement, still holding Jonathan's hand, as if afraid to break the spiritual connection they had forged. You know what? I think we just witnessed a miracle, not the kind with flashing lights and special effects, but the kind that changes hearts and lives. Jonathan, thank you for being willing to be used by God in such a powerful way. His gratitude was genuine and profound. Steve, thank you for creating space for God to move, Jonathan replied. You could have kept things light and surface level, but you chose to go deeper. That took courage, and I believe God honored your willingness to be vulnerable. The mutual respect and spiritual connection between the two men was evident to everyone watching, both in the studio and at home. The audience began to applaud, but it wasn't the typical game show applause for entertainment. This was something deeper, a recognition of the sacred moment they had witnessed and participated in. Many were still crying, others were smiling through their tears, and all were clearly impacted by the unexpected encounter with divine love and presence they had just experienced. You know what I want to say to everyone watching, Steve addressed the cameras directly, his usual showmanship replaced by authentic pastoral care. If you're struggling today, if you're feeling alone or forgotten or unloved, I want you to know that what just happened here is available to you, too. God's love isn't just for television studios or famous people, it's for you, right where you are. Jonathan nodded enthusiastically, his face glowing with the joy of shared ministry. That's exactly right, Steve. Jesus said he came not for the healthy, but for the sick. Not for the righteous, but for sinners. If you're watching this and feeling broken or lost or unworthy, you're exactly who Jesus is looking for. He loves you with an everlasting love, and he's waiting for you to come home. The control room was receiving calls from viewers across the country, many reporting that they had felt God's presence through their television screens. Some said they had given their hearts to Jesus while watching. Others said they had been reminded of God's love after years of feeling distant from faith. The impact of this unscripted moment was reaching far beyond the studio walls. I want to say something to my fellow entertainers who might be watching, Steve continued, his voice carrying the authority of experience and conviction. We have a platform, and we have a choice about how to use it. We can just entertain, or we can allow God to use us to touch hearts and change lives. Jonathan, you've shown us what it looks like to be faithful with the platform God has given you. Steve, every one of us has a platform, Jonathan replied, his eyes bright with passion, whether it's in Hollywood or in a classroom, in an office or at home with our families. God wants to use all of us to reveal His love to the world. We just have to be willing to say yes when He calls. His words were carrying the same power that had transformed the studio atmosphere. As the moment continued, both teams of celebrity contestants had joined the circle of prayer, and many audience members had come forward to the stage area. What had begun as a game show had become an impromptu worship service with people of all backgrounds and beliefs united in experiencing the love and presence of God. The sight was both beautiful and unprecedented in television history. I've got to ask you, Jonathan, Steve said, his curiosity genuine and his heart open. How do you maintain this kind of faith and authenticity in Hollywood? I mean, that's not exactly an environment known for supporting deep spiritual conviction. His question reflected the struggles many Christians face in secular work environments, making the conversation relatable to viewers worldwide. Jonathan's laugh was warm and genuine. Steve, it's not always easy, but I've learned that authenticity is actually what the world is hungry for. When you're genuine about your faith, when you live it, instead of just talking about it, people respond. Even in Hollywood, there are so many people who are searching for meaning and purpose. They're drawn to the real thing when they see it. That's so true, Steve agreed, nodding thoughtfully. People can spot fake from a mile away, but they are also drawn to authentic faith like moths to a flame. You've shown me today that it's possible to be genuinely faithful and genuinely successful, and that those two things aren't mutually exclusive. His observation was creating light bulb moments for many viewers who had struggled with similar questions. The beautiful thing about God, Jonathan continued, his voice carrying increasing conviction, is that He doesn't ask us to choose between faithfulness and success. He just redefines us what success really means. For me, success isn't about fame or fortune anymore. It's about being used by God to love people and point them toward Jesus. And honestly, Steve, that's the most fulfilling life I could imagine. Steve stood there absorbing Jonathan's words, completely forgetting about television protocols, commercial breaks, or anything else related to show business. His heart was being ministered to by this humble actor who had somehow managed to maintain his authenticity and faith while portraying the most important figure in human history. The moment was about to reach its peak, and everyone could sense something extraordinary was about to happen. Then Jonathan looked directly into Steve's eyes with a love and compassion that seemed to transcend human ability and spoke the words that would change everything. Steve, you know what Jesus would say to you right now if He were standing here. Steve's breath caught in his throat as he waited for Jonathan's response. Completely unaware that his vulnerability was being broadcast live to millions, he would say, Steve, my beloved son, you have been faithful with what I've given you. You've used your platform to bring joy to the world, and today you've honored me with your willingness to seek me publicly. I am so proud of you. The words hit Steve like a lightning bolt of divine love, and he began to weep openly, no longer caring about his image or his reputation. In that moment, he felt the unmistakable presence of Jesus Christ Himself speaking through Jonathan, affirming his ministry and his heart. Oh my God, Steve whispered, his hands covering his face as the tears streamed down his cheeks. I feel Him, Jonathan. I actually feel Jesus here with us right now. The entire studio gasped as they witnessed Steve Harvey, one of television's most recognizable personalities, completely undone by the love of God. But what happened next shocked everyone even more. A presence so powerful and loving filled the studio that people throughout the audience began falling to their knees in worship. Crew members dropped their equipment and began praying. Even the most skeptical staff members were overwhelmed by an undeniable sense of divine presence. That's because He is here, Steve, Jonathan said softly, tears streaming down his own face. Jesus promised that wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in His name, He would be there also, and He's here right now. Not just for you and me, but for everyone in this place and everyone watching at home. He's here because He loves us and wants us to know that we're never alone. Steve looked around the studio with new eyes, seeing the faces of people who were experiencing genuine encounters with God. Some were laughing with joy, others were crying with relief, and all were clearly being touched by something supernatural. This is what a real miracle looks like, Steve said in wonder. Not special effects or dramatic theatrics, but the presence of God showing up in an ordinary place and changing everything. In the control room, the director was receiving call after call from viewers reporting similar experiences in their homes. People across America were feeling the presence of God through their television screens, some for the first time in years. The phone lines were overwhelmed with people saying they wanted to give their lives to Jesus after witnessing what was happening in the studio. A revival was breaking out through a game show. "Jonathan," Steve said through his tears, "I need you to know that God used you today to minister to my heart in a way I desperately needed. I've been struggling with some personal things lately, questioning whether I was truly making a difference with my work, but through you, Jesus just told me that he's proud of me. That changes everything." His confession was raw and beautiful. "Steve, that's exactly how God works," Jonathan replied, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had experienced this kind of divine encounter before. "He meets us in our doubts and fears with his love and affirmation. And what's beautiful is that by being vulnerable about your own struggles, you've given everyone watching permission to bring their struggles to Jesus, too. You've just ministered to millions of people." The audience was now openly worshiping, with hands raised and voices lifted in praise and prayer. What had begun as entertainment had become the most authentic worship service many had ever experienced. People were hugging strangers, praying together, and celebrating the unexpected move of God in their midst. The Family Feud set had been transformed into a sanctuary where heaven touched earth. "I want everyone to remember this moment," Steve declared, addressing the cameras with passionate conviction. "Not because of anything I did or said, but because of what God did here today. He showed up in the most unlikely place through the most ordinary conversation and reminded us all that his love is real. His presence is available, and his heart for us never changes." His words carried the weight of genuine testimony. As the climax of this supernatural moment reached its peak, Jonathan spoke one final word that sealed the transformation: "Jesus wants everyone watching to know that this same love, this same presence, this same acceptance is available to you right now. You don't have to be in a television studio or meet a celebrity. You just have to open your heart and say, 'Jesus, I need you.'" He's been waiting for that invitation your whole life. Steve slowly composed himself, wiping his eyes and taking deep breaths as the overwhelming presence of God settled into a peaceful joy. "Jonathan, I don't know how to thank you for being obedient to God today. You could have just played the game, answered the questions, and promoted your show. Instead, you allowed the Holy Spirit to use you to minister to all of us." His gratitude was profound and genuine, reflecting the heart change he had experienced. "Steve, thank you for creating the space for God to move," Jonathan replied humbly. "You showed incredible courage by being vulnerable on live television. That willingness to be real and authentic opened the door for God to do something beautiful here today." The mutual respect and spiritual connection between the two men was evident to everyone watching, both in the studio and at home across America. The show's producer approached them with tears still in his eyes, holding a phone. "Gentlemen, I'm getting calls from our network affiliates across the country. Viewers are reporting that they've given their hearts to Jesus while watching this show. Churches are calling saying their phones are ringing off the hook with people wanting to know more about faith. We've just witnessed something unprecedented in television history." Steve looked at Jonathan with wonder and deep respect. "Man, this is why God put you in that role as Jesus. It's not just because you can act, it's because you carry his heart. Today, you didn't just play Jesus, you allowed Jesus to love people through you. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." His words reflected the profound spiritual impact the encounter had made on his life. "And Steve," Jonathan responded with a warm smile, "you showed us all what it looks like to be humble enough to receive God's love and bold enough to share it with others. This moment happened because you were willing to go deeper than entertainment and allow God to use your platform for his glory. Thank you for your faithfulness." The affirmation was healing and empowering for Steve. In the days that followed, the video of their encounter went viral across social media platforms, reaching hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Churches reported record attendance as people sought to experience more of what they had witnessed on television. Steve Harvey found himself changed, approaching his work with a new sense of purpose and spiritual awareness. The entertainment industry was buzzing about the power of authentic faith in media. Jonathan continued his work on The Chosen with even greater conviction, knowing that his willingness to be vulnerable about his faith had touched hearts around the world. He received thousands of messages from people who had been impacted by that Family Feud moment, many sharing that they had given their lives to Jesus or returned to faith after years of doubt. The ripple effects of obedience were beyond measure. Steve began each show with a prayer, asking God to use him to bring not just laughter, but hope to his audiences. He spoke more openly about his faith, inspiring other entertainers to be authentic about their spiritual convictions. The entertainment industry slowly began to change as people realized that authentic faith resonated with audiences hungry for genuine meaning and purpose in their entertainment. The Family Feud episode became known as the Miracle episode, and it was watched and rewatched by millions of people seeking to experience the presence of God. Churches used it as an evangelistic tool, and many pastors preached sermons about being available for God to use in unexpected moments. Jonathan and Steve's friendship deepened, and they collaborated on several faith-based projects that continued to impact lives. Looking back on that extraordinary day, both men realized that God had orchestrated every detail. From the casting of the show to the timing of their conversation to the technical decisions that kept the cameras rolling, what seemed like an accident was actually an appointment with divine purpose. Their willingness to be vulnerable had created space for God to minister to millions of hungry hearts around the world. Perhaps you're watching this story and wondering if God could use you in such a powerful way. The beautiful truth is that He can, and He wants to. Like Jonathan Roumie, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to let God's love flow through you. Like Steve Harvey, you don't have to have all the answers, you just have to have an open heart. When ordinary people make themselves available to an extraordinary God, miracles happen in the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring content and share in the comments below how God has used unexpected moments to reveal His love in your own life.